So the question is, how many people read through the book of Revelation this week?
Oh,
Hudson did. You know, how many times did you read through it?
Twice.
Twice he read through it.
40
Who else read through it? How about Ray?
I have
Ray read.
every day for about a year.
No, I meant the book of Revelation. Otherwise,
Yeah.
Otherwise, you better be up here teaching the class if you read it every day for a year.
It all hasn't been revealed to me yet.
You listen in, Gary.
Yes, yes. I wanted to thank you all for your prayers for Diane too. She's going to have a surgical procedure this Wednesday in Phoenix, and I'll be down there with her. And we'll all be praying, I'm sure, for the success of that surgery on her heart.
Okay, so she's doing that Wednesday?
Yes.
Wednesday, okay, I'm just gonna do that so we're updated. Wherever you went here. Okay. So. Back to Revelation. We said last week, we talked about last week about the Lion of the tribe of Judah. We had a shorter class because we had the business meeting. We talked about the Lion of the tribe of Judah, that when John turned around, what he saw was a lamb as if it had been slain. And we talked about that. And I said last week, I think this week, we'll talk about the scroll, because the scroll is kind of the big, it's kind of the big deal there. Can I get Carl to read chapter 5 one more time, just so we pick up the flow? But the idea this time is to focus in on when you're reading it, he's reading it on the scroll. Okay.
Then I saw in the right hand of him who sat on the throne a scroll with writing on both sides and sealed with 7 seals. I saw a mighty angel proclaiming in a loud voice, "Who is worthy to break the seals and open the scroll?" But no one in heaven or on earth or under the earth could open the scroll or even look inside. I wept and wept because no one was found who was worthy to open the scroll or look inside. Then one of the elders said to me, "Do not weep. See, the Lion of the tribe of Judah, the Root of David, has triumphed. He is able to open the scroll and its 7 seals." Then I saw a lamb looking as if it had been slain, standing in the center of the throne, encircled by the 4 living creatures and the elders. He had 7 horns and 7 eyes, which are the 7 spirits of God set out into all the earth. He came and took the scroll from the right hand of him who sat on the throne. And when he had taken it, the 4 living creatures and the 24 elders fell down before the Lamb. Each one had a harp, and they were holding golden bowls full of incense, which are the prayers of the saints. And they sang a new song. "You are worthy to take the scroll and open its seals, because you were slain, and with your blood you purchased for men for God from every tribe and language and people and nation. You have made them to be a kingdom and priests to serve our God, and they will reign on the earth." Then I looked and heard the voice of many angels, numbering thousands upon thousands, and 10,000 times 10,000. They encircled the throne and the living creatures and the elders. In a loud voice they sang, "Worthy is the Lamb who was slain to receive power and wealth and wisdom and strength and honor and glory and praise." Then I heard every creature in heaven and on earth and under the earth and on the sea and all that is in them singing, "To him who sits on the throne and to the Lamb be praise and honor and glory and power forever and ever." The 4 living creatures said, "Amen," and the elders fell down and worshiped.
Okay, very good. Thank you. When it got to the multitude, the 10,000 times 10,000, whatever the numbers were. We talked last week a little bit about I think, chapter 7, when it talked about that 144,000 to 12,000 from the 12 tribes. And and it talked about there's 144,000, whatever. But then again, John, when he turned around to look, he saw a multitude that could not be counted, you know? So, and then I think, I want to say in chapter 14, but I'm probably wrong. It speaks of another multitude. They're all the same multitude. All we're talking about is all these people of God, whether you count them as 10,000 times 10,000, or, you know, whatever the number was, or you count them as the 12,000 or the 12 tribes, or however that, they're all the same. It's always the same. Because John, you know, we talked about this in the introduction to Revelation. It's called recapitulation, how they do. Recapitulation, where he's telling the same story over and over again. Okay. You know, over and over again, he's just adding different intensities or details to it. And so when he comes to the end of a certain thing, and you see something climactic happening, that's the end of the age. But then it starts over again, and it becomes the end of the age, and then, you know, like that. So that's why all these things are, you know, are similar. But the scroll, if you listen to Carl, or you read along, you know, the scroll's a pretty prominent thing. It seems to be the center point of what John's looking at. He's seeing, you know, the one on the throne. He's seeing the one who looks like a lamb slain, taking the scroll. Everybody's worried about who can open the scroll. You know, the angels even declare in a loud voice, nobody's worthy to open the scroll. And that causes distress until that's when, you know, Jesus comes in and he's able to open the scroll. So I've got quite a bit in your notes here because I wanted to go to all these different passages, but I didn't want us to have to be flipping around the Bible. But we talked about, it talks about how the scroll is written on both sides. You know, and that seems to me mysterious. You know, if they would write on both sides, because it seems like when you seal it up, part of it's still showing. I don't know. But in Exodus, and I've got this in your notes here, other instances where things are written on two sides. It says in Exodus 32, then Moses turned and went down from the mountain with the two tablets. We know that story, right? Mm-hmm. 10 Commandments stuff. Two tablets of testimony in his hand, tablets that were written on both sides, on the front and the back. They were written. The tablets were the work of God, and the writing was the writing of God engraved on the tablets. In other words, the writing of God, he wrote it with his own finger. How many people here thought about the 10 Commandments being written on both sides of the stone? We think of the two tablets side by side, you know, but he's talking about both sides of the, you know, both sides of the stone. So what, go ahead.
Does that make it 4 tablets then?
Yeah. Take 4 tablets before going to bed. Anyway, in Ezekiel, oh, Carl.
I think that brings to my mind the picture of completeness.
Mm-hmm.
It's completely wrote. Both sides, it's filled out.
There's no room to add.
There's no room to add. It's done.
Yeah, good point. Very good point. Yeah. In Ezekiel 2, it says, because he's given a scroll also. And he says, and when I looked, behold, a hand was stretched out to me, and behold, a scroll of the book was in it. And he spread it before me, and it had writing on the front and on the back. And there were written on all of it the words of lamentation and mourning and woe. So again, in his scroll, it's this thing of all these things that are going to happen, that are happening, because they're happening in Ezekiel's day. You know, because he's talking about the woes that are going to come to the Jews who are in captivity in Babylon, or they've already come to him because he was one of the ones taken into the captivity. So he's talking about writing about the woes, the people that are going through the woes. Okay. Now he's told to eat it. You know, he's told to eat the scroll, which is funny. You don't have this note. He says, son of man, eat whatever you find here. Eat this scroll and go. Speak to the house of Israel. So I opened my mouth, and he gave me this scroll to eat. And he said to me, son of man, feed your belly with the scroll that I give you and fill your stomach with it. Then I ate it and it was in my mouth as sweet as honey. And he said to me, son of man, go to the house of Israel and speak with my words to them. So now some of this scroll, maybe it's not really a piece of paper rolled up, it's gotta be symbolic.
Papyrus.
It's gotta be symbolic for something, because he's telling them to ingest it. Now, maybe it's real, and when he's talking about eating it, maybe that's just to study it, so you've got it as part of your repertoire of what it is that you teach or preach. Whatever it is, it's something that's supposed to be proclaimed, okay? John's told the same thing, in Revelation. In Revelation 10, he says, so I went to the angel and told him, this is a little bit later on, we're still in the opening of the, of those seals, but this is in verse 10. So I went to the angel and told him to give me the little scroll. And he said to me, take and eat it. It will make your stomach bitter, but your mouth, it will be sweet as honey. And I took the little scroll from the hand of the angel and ate it. It was sweet as honey in my mouth, but when I had eaten it, my stomach was made bitter. And I was told, you must, again, prophesy about the many peoples and nations and languages and kings. Okay, so he's told the same thing. Again, the scroll, eat it. When he talks about here, the bitter and the sweet, because the bitter is judgment and the sweet is redemption, that we're going to find here. So all this stuff, it's like one big story. Doesn't matter if it's Old Testament, New Testament, they have the same imagery, but John, we'll see, is talking to a different set of people who are going through turmoil. Okay? And so he's proclaiming to them what that scroll says. It's going to explain to them everything that goes on. So here's another thing. 7 seals require proper signets. So the king seals it, presses his ring into it, you break his seal without permission, off with your head, at least that's what. So perhaps this is like a will and testament, a last will and testament, not to be opened, unsealed until the testator is dead. That's the way a will works, isn't it? I mean, will means nothing until you drop dead. Then it means something to all the kids.
Going on a trip.
And the book of Hebrews talks about this. And you got it in your notes there. For where a will is involved, the death of the one who made it must be established. For a will takes effect only at death, since it is not in force as long as the one who made it is still alive. So in this case, and we studied Hebrews for quite some time, about a year, on Sunday mornings, is who's the testator? Who made out the will? God, Jesus, yeah. Okay. When did he die? Pardon? 2,000 years ago. Yeah, 2,000 years ago. He died on the cross. So I think what they're talking about here about this scroll is like the opening of the will. Okay. So I got in the notes here. Hebrews is telling us why the death of Christ was essential to give effect to this new covenant. And that's the big thing. It's the end of the old covenant, the beginning of the new covenant. And I've got, what did Jesus say in Luke 22:20? Somebody there want to read it? It's on your sheet.
And likewise the cup after they had eaten, saying, this cup that is poured out for you is the new covenant in my blood.
Where do we hear that?
Communion.
Communion. Yeah,
Yeah,
the verse
communion.
before says, this is my body, and that. So, but see, what he's saying is that this is my blood, this is my death. This is my death, which brings in the new covenant. Okay, and then you have to figure out what the new covenant is and what it's all about. But anyway, so the old covenant is being put aside. The new covenant is being brought in. All of this stuff that we're gonna see in the seven seals and the seven trumpets and the seven bowls is gonna be a description of that turmoil that came on the people, whether it be Israel, whether it be the church at that time. You know, by the world, it's just gonna be, you know, all hell breaking loose. Now, whether it's spiritual stuff or actual battle stuff, you know, we can discuss that, because I don't want that to be the topic, you know, here, although we'll get into what, you know, what Jesus said. So, so here's the thing. So we got to figure out, so what did Jesus tell the people? So during Holy Week, Jesus put Jerusalem and its leaders on trial under the standards of the old covenant and found them guilty. You know, we look at it, and we think it's Jesus being put on trial. But Jesus isn't being put on trial. Jesus is putting the Jewish nation, the Jewish system, he's putting the whole old covenant on trial. Because what he does, he keeps pointing back, you guys don't even keep this. You guys are incapable of keeping it. In fact, you're wicked because you keep other people, you know, from keeping it. So it's actually all of Jerusalem that's on trial. In Matthew 21:43, the reason I'm bringing up these, like Olivet Discourse, the things and stuff like that, is because this message is what's in the scroll. Okay. So in Matthew 21:43, he says, therefore I tell you, the kingdom of God will be taken away from you and given to a people producing its fruits. I mean, that sounds pretty serious. Okay. So here's the thing, and this is where we have a difference in interpretation with some other Christian groups. Who is Revelation speaking to? Is it speaking to the Jewish nation before the temple's destroyed? Or is it speaking to some future generation, even future to us, on the last days scenarios? So, but if we listen to Jesus's words, I think we find out that he's talking to those people, you know, those people that are there. So he said, you know, be taken away from you. I think that chapter 21, that part of 21 is the parable of the talents. You know, about the one steward who didn't do what he was supposed to do. And he says, it's going to be taken away from you. You know, the kingdom's going to be taken away from you. And then I've got that next note. They hit their target because it said in verse 45, when the chief priests and the Pharisees heard his parables, they perceived that he was speaking about them. And although they were seeking to arrest him, they feared the crowds because they held him to be a prophet. So, you know, prophets are going, chief priests and the Pharisees, they're going, you talking to me? They are, I mean, they got it. You know, so often we don't get it, but the enemies of Jesus always got it. You have Christians argue over whether Jesus ever claimed to be God or not. I mean, Christians argue over it, you know, besides unbelievers. But I mean, argue over, did Jesus ever really say he was God? But then you look in the Bible and you find 3-4 times that the chief priests and Pharisees wanted to stone him because he was making himself equal to God. You know, they got it. It was clear to them. For some reason, it's not clear. You know, it's not clear to us today. You know, so let me know if you guys
Hey,
got any
Gene?
questions. Who said Gene?
Gene,
Oh,
What?
right. No, see,
wasn't it
so
until,
I hear amplification. I'm always assuming it's them. It could be you guys. Go ahead, Ray.
wasn't it until 325 and the Council of Nicaea that Jesus and God, all of that was all put together?
Well, what it was, so he's asking, he says, well, wasn't it until the Council of Nicaea in 325 that it was all put together that Jesus was God? And the answer is no. Okay. The answer is that everybody believed Jesus was God except some people. But the some people were a small minority, you know, and this was led by What was his name? Arius.
Calvin?
No, no, you're way before now. No, but Arius, you know, and the Arians were saying, no, Jesus wasn't God. Okay, and so the council got together to say, let's work this out. You know, because here, and the vote was, I mean, I read the number of the vote at the Council of Nicaea at one time, and it was something like 580 to 2. You know, and then they kicked the guys, the opposers out of the church. No, they kicked them out of the church as heretics. But it was something that was believed, but they had to get together to, well, not so much to affirm it, just to say, we do all know that this is true, right? You know, it's just like if something comes into the church today that we know to be true, but somebody's causing trouble, or 4, 5, 6 people causing trouble, that we say, come on, let's have a meeting, let's discuss it. And it's not to, let's see what we can see. It's like, let's affirm, somebody else said that earlier. You know, let's affirm what it is that we, you know, that we know. So anyway, so my point was that we have trouble with it today, but even the enemies of Jesus knew what he was saying and who he was saying it to. So then I've got on here, so what, you know, what judgment does Jesus pass on Jerusalem and the temple? So in Matthew 23, that 37 to 39, he says, "O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, the city that kills the prophets and stones those who are sent to it." And we saw that in the parable, because the parable was the vineyard master who goes away and he leaves his servants in, you know, in charge. And then when he comes back and he wants his, you know, wants his prophets or wants whatever he wants, they kill the one who came to ask. And then so he sent another and they killed him. And so finally he sent his son and they killed him also. So that's, you know, there's what he's saying. But he's speaking over Jerusalem now, the whole city. And he said, how often would I have gathered your children together as a hen gathers her brood under her wings, and you were not willing? See, your house is left to you desolate. For I tell you, you will not see me again until you say, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. So it sounds to me he's pronounced judgment on Jerusalem. I mean, that city. And he says that your house will be left desolate. What was their house?
Temple.
The temple. Yeah.
And the temple was destroyed.
Pardon?
The temple was destroyed.
Right, it will be. I mean, you know, eventually it will be. So he says in Matthew 24, Jesus, now that was against Jerusalem. Now this one, 24, Jesus left the temple and was going away when his disciples came to point out to him the buildings of the temple. But he answered them, you see all these? Do you not? Truly I say to you, there will not be left here one stone upon another that will not be thrown down. So there he's pronouncing judgment on he's talking to those people. Here he's talking to his disciples, saying, you just watch, you know, saying you just watch, because it'll come in the lifetime of some of them. You know, you just watch and see, you know, see what happens. One of the most dramatic expressions in this judicial language is in Matthew 23, so that so that on you may come all the right on you may come all the righteous bloodshed from earth, from the blood of the righteous Abel to the blood of Zachariah the son of Barachiah, or whatever it is.
Barakiah.
Huh? Barachiah, thank you. Whom you murdered between the sanctuary and the altar. I mean, these priests and that have been doing this forever. Back in the Old Testament, they've been killing the prophets of God, you know. And I think we talked about this one time earlier, where it says Abel to Zechariah. That's A to Z. That's all of them. You've killed all the prophets, you know, whether it's actually physically killed them or jailed them or did. But you've always been against my prophets that I've sent, you know, sent to you. But here's what he says at the end. Truly, I say to you, all these things will come upon this generation. People argue over what this generation means. You know, because what they'll say is, and trust me, I'm not saying who's right or wrong and stuff like this, although they're wrong and I'm right. But I'm not saying that, no. So some people will say, or a lot of people will say, majority of American Christians will say today, no, he's talking about the generation that'll see those things happen. So something's gonna happen and still hasn't happened, and who knows when it's going to happen. You know, some people say, well, no, it's talking about the Jews. That generation can also mean race. This race will not. Yeah. That's fine. They can do that. Anyway, but when he does this part about, about the righteous blood, truly I say to you, all these things will come upon this generation. This follows 34 verses of Jesus pronouncing the 7 woes on the scribes and Pharisees. So, I mean, if you go back into, Matthew 23, it starts out somewhere in there, woe to you Pharisees and hypocrites. And then he goes on, and then he gets down to later and he says, woe to you Pharisees. And he does that 7 times. And then he finishes up with, this generation will see the destruction. I think he was serious about those, those people back then. Remember, so we don't get lost here, trying to keep focused what's in the scroll, okay? Yeah. So, these statements of judgments represent the setting aside of what had been in place for 1,500 years. Think about it. Think about if somebody we may have said this, maybe in one of the other classes, I don't know. Said, what if somebody came to us today and said, okay, that covenant with Jesus Christ is now coming to an end. God has said, this one's coming to an end, and here's the new covenant. It doesn't matter if it's true or not. How easily could we break our Christianity habit? Even if you thought, wow, that guy's making sense, maybe it is, but man, I've been doing this for 2,000 years. It doesn't come. So that's what Jesus is asking the Jews to do. It's like, trust me, I've got a new and a better covenant. They're not coming easy. It's hard. Man. Carl.
But when Jesus said that, he had proof. He had the whole scriptures behind him prophesying that what was going to happen was going to happen. So they believe he proved to them through their own scriptures that what he was saying was true.
Well, he laid out evidence for him. I don't know if he actually proved it to him because they crucified him.
He must have proved it to him, or we wouldn't be here today.
Muslims, I'll play devil's advocate. Muslims will tell you the same story. Muslims will say, no, Jesus spoke of me. No, the Old Testament spoke of me. Now, when we tell them no, they go, well, you have to read the Quran and the Hadith and stuff like that. And they go, I have read the Quran. I've read the Quran. But they go, no, you read it in English. You can't read it in English. You have to read it in Arabic. That's their out for you to say, I've read your book and it's not true. They go, no, you got to read it in Arabic. Like that. Anyway, so let's go on. Anyway, so to give way to this new covenant, this is represented by the scroll. The scene that we're seeing in Revelation 5 there, that we're reading about, and what we'll see in the next several chapters as we see the seals open up. Let me take time. Okay, so what's in the scroll? Okay.
The judgment against man.
I'm sorry, who's talking?
I am.
Yeah, go ahead.
Is a judgment of sin against man for the non-believers.
Yeah, he said it's the judgment against man to the unbelievers, but it's more than that also, Because you also in there, we're gonna see the promise of God for his church, for his body, like that. And, as we go through, chapters on 6, 7, 8, I think are opening of seals and getting into trumpets. Then there's an interlude and a couple more chapters, and then you get to like chapter 13, 14, you get into the 7th trumpet, and then which turns into the 7 bowls and all that. So we'll get into that as we cover that territory, but I just want to give you a big scope of this scroll is actually a big something. And I want to give the background to Jesus's words that are going to be those promises of God, whether they're promises for good or promises for bad, that's what makes up the scroll. So as we go along, we get into the details. But but the 7 seals, we won't see the complete contents until the 7th seal is open. Because then you've gone through the 7 things that were there. But when it opens, there's 7 more somethings, the trumpets, you got to go through the 7 trumpets before you get the whole story of the trumpets, which is, like I said, technically same thing as the seals, but with greater intensity, to them. And then it gets to the bowls, and the incense, and the bowls are going to be poured out, we'll get into who it is, but I mean,
AG,
yes, sir. Okay, yeah.
have you ever read where the scroll represented the deed to the earth? I've never read it, but I heard a preacher or minister saying that that's what it represented, that it was a deed to the earth.
And that's what I think that they're wrong when they say that. I've heard that too, where they say, well, Satan today owns the title deed to the earth. And when Jesus takes back that scroll, that's the title deed. That's Jesus but there's never been a time that Jesus has held title to the earth. I mean, you never, I think Peter refers to him somewhere, as the power and something in the sky or in the, I don't know, like that. But I mean, yeah, but people do talk like that.
Yeah, I've been researching it for about 10 years now, and I've never heard of it. So,
gotta go down to the county recorder. And see what they say. Okay. The funny thing is that people forget. I mean, on every side. I mean, on every side of and not just in the Book of Revelation. I mean, anytime you get into any kind of apocalyptic writing, people want to fill in the things that we don't know, or fill in the things that we know what it says. How do I apply it to today? And maybe it doesn't apply to today. But as humans, we just have this knack, and we got to fill in the gaps. We got to make it clear. And comes up with stuff.
The same minister said that that the scroll would only be written on one side because the other side would be rough. But I guess he forgot that he was dealing with God.
Well, no, that's and that's the thing. I mean, and that's probably what I think that goes back to what Carl said, that it showed that may not be the way scrolls were written, but this isn't meaning necessarily that it's physically written on both sides, because we don't even know if it's really a physical scroll. But the thing is that they would say, no, when they got these papyri, or they did the lamb skins or whatever, they would clean up one side to be able to write on it, and because it was a laborious type of a thing to do, and then go on. But the scripture, all we see in here is that it says it was written on both sides. Yeah, so it takes a little bit of guts to say, well, John wrote that wrong. Because we know the way, and he may be truthful in what he's saying as far as the way scrolls were written back then, but that doesn't mean that contradicts the words. So,
Yeah.
AG,
Uh,
AG,
who,
I mean,
somebody in the room. Okay, go.
under your tithing, so what is in the scroll? It says, the first bullet says seals 1 to 4 equal to birth pains, and then wars and rumors of wars, much like the Olivet Discourse.
Well, the Olivet Discourse is in Matthew 23. That's 23 and 24 is Jesus's calling down the end of the age. In fact, I've got it there, Matthew 24:3. That's the beginning. Just to give you an intro, it just says, as he sat on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately and said, tell us when these things will be and what will be the sign of your coming and the end of the age. And Jesus goes on to, to tell them.
So the Olivet is the Mount of Olives then?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Now, okay, we probably won't get much further because once Dennis comes back, it'll be time to sing. But here's the thing, is that I made myself lose my, talking about the end of the age. They say, tell us what will be and the end of the age. This is an important thing. My interpretation, okay, I'll go there, is my thing is that it's the end of an age. It's not the end of the world. Okay, see, people want to think that all these things are the end of the world, but they're saying, what's the end of the age? And I think their understanding is that something's ending and something's starting. They may not have it clear, but so when they talk about the end of the age is the end of the Mosaic covenant. Been going on for all those years, and that's coming to an end. That's a fulfillment of Jeremiah's prophecy of I'll bring a new covenant, to the people, and he describes what that covenant will entail. That's in Jeremiah 31, and that's what he's saying. The new covenant with blood is the new covenant, like that. So it's that ending, and it's of an age. It doesn't have to be the end of the world. Carl.
What are your thoughts when Jesus was teaching before his death and resurrection? That's when he first mentioned the end of the age. Would that be, his death would be the end of the age he was talking about?
At least it ushers in that age. I think a lot of things are a process. You gotta remember, to the Jews, when Jerusalem's destroyed and the temple is destroyed, to them that's the end of the world. I mean, they have nothing outside of, outside of that. I've got something I can read here. I've got it somewhere in the notes later on, but it talks about. I got a book. See, I say that all of this happens during the Jewish wars. The Jewish wars were from 66 AD to 70 AD. And it was finalized when Titus came into Jerusalem, sacked the town, destroyed the temple. Okay? It may even be that he was the abomination of desolation, that he set up an altar to Zeus or whoever their gods were at that time. But earlier, anyway, this is Josephus's Jewish Wars, but this has got a lot of pictures and a lot of commentary in there. But I've got a note somewhere in there about Vespasian. He was the one who attacked into Galilee and came down to Jerusalem, and he had a scorched earth policy. So it says in here, in order to besiege Jerusalem on all sides, this is fairly short, on all sides, Vespasian established camps at Jericho and Adida, garrisoning each with a mixed force of Romans and auxiliaries. He also sent Lucius Annius to Gerasa and gave him a squadron of cavalry and an ample number of infantry. Annas took the town by assault, put to death 1,000 of the younger men who had failed to escape, enslaved the women and children, allowed the soldiers to plunder everything of value, and then set fire to the houses before he advanced against the surrounding villages. The able-bodied fled, the weak perished, and all that was left was consigned to the flames. Now that the war had engulfed the whole region of mountain and plains, it was impossible to leave Jerusalem. And it goes, it goes on, but I mean, that's what they were facing. So when we see fire coming out of the sky, or whatever, when we get into the seals and the trumpets and stuff like that, I think Jesus is giving this as a letter of hope to people. You're going to go through tough times, but we win in the end. And that's the message. What kind of a letter? I mean, if we were going, say everything that everybody says that bad's happening in America today came to fruition, and the church was on the run, and both the Republicans and Democrats are trying to kill Christians, like that. But what kind of a letter would we write to our communities to give them hope in Jesus still? I think that's what's happening here in this seal. And we'll see this as we go through. Like I say, we'll get into the seals, next week and stuff like that. But just to realize that this hang on a second, Denny. This destruction of Jerusalem, it says that Vespasian, now they couldn't get out of Jerusalem. Vespasian gets called back for the funeral of Nero. Okay, Nero gets, he dies, gets assassinated. He gets called back. So he has to turn it over, and it's Titus, because we always read about Titus coming into Jerusalem, sacking the city, burning down the temple, destroying the temple. But it was Vespasian's war, these things happened in real history, like that. Now, that's why I think that it's legitimate to read the book of Revelation as having been something that was predicted for before 70 AD. The thing is that, because people say, well, John was written in 95. I think John was written before 70. I think all the Bible books were written before 70. I think with Jesus predicting that the town of, Jerusalem would be destroyed, temple would be destroyed, if it had happened and somebody's still writing afterwards, they'd say, by the way, my Jesus said this was what was going to happen. And here's some snapshots to show you that it happened. But you got none of that. You have nothing in scripture that talks about the sacking of Jerusalem and the destruction of the temple. Nothing. So
Gotta go, Gene.
okay, have a good trip to the doctors. That was
Okay.
right. Okay. Anyway, any questions? You can read the rest of those, those notes there. I think I've made my point as far as, I'm sorry, Denny had something. I missed you before.
Yeah, just before you turn it over to Deacon Dennis for the hymns, I have some comments I wanted to make.
Yeah.
I don't know, is this a good time or not?
I mean, about the study or about Master?
Well, it's a little bit off text, but it relates to a lot of revelations.
Yeah.
Yesterday, my wife and I went to the movie Life After Death.
Well, I can't.
The movie Life After Death. It's another one of the Angel productions. It's in the theaters here.
It's a new movie.
Yeah, has
right?
anybody seen it? Okay, let me just give you just a brief overview. A lot of revelations, it's at least in the earlier chapters, talked about a little kind of a glimpse into heaven or what it was going to look like. Whether it was John, a glimpse for John, or Paul, it was a glimpse of possibly heaven. Well, this movie, the production crew gets a series of testimonials of people who have died, but they recover. Okay, a number of them saw such beautiful things that they didn't want to go back. A lot of them had from terrible accidents, had broken bodies, everything else. What they saw was so beautiful, the light, the colors, everything was so vivid. They felt better than they ever had felt in their entire lives. And they didn't want to go back. Except there was one of them who was acknowledged that he was an atheist. What he saw was terrible. Scared the heck out of him. And he finally said, God help me. And he did come back then, but he was on the road to hell. And he saw what he saw, and it was terrible, frightening. The others' testimonials saw everything so beautiful, so wonderful. They really didn't even want to go back to their old life. It's very interesting.
You know, the whole idea of near-death experiences, you know, you can go on and on and on for, you know, forever. The only, and I can't deny anybody's experience just because I can't. But I look in scripture, and every time that we see someone seeing a heavenly scene, I don't care if it's in Ezekiel, the first chapter, I don't care if it's in Isaiah, the 6th chapter, I don't care if it's all these times in Revelation where John walks up, you know, he's called up to heaven. They're all terrified. They all end up by falling down. Probably the unbeliever probably had the most realistic, you know, experience. I don't know about these people that saw it. It was so beautiful, and they, you know, because everywhere we read in the scripture, when somebody sees a heavenly scene or sees a heavenly angel, I mean, it's like they need to go change their shorts. You know, I mean,
That's
yeah,
'cause
so
they're
I
still
don't-
in their
I don't-
body.
I don't know. Like I said,
The theme that came across is the believers saw something different than this one that was an affirmed
Yeah.
atheist.
well, like I say, the next verse, or one of the verses we read, talked about when they saw Jesus come to take the throne. You know, what did the 24 elders do? 24, yeah, so they fell down with the harps and everything. Yeah, like, but near-death experience, a whole different can of worms, but I'm glad that they made, I guess I'm glad that they made the movie. Yes, sir.
So there's some real life experience also in that area. I've been with quite a few people who, as they passed away. One of them, we still have some fun from him, Paul. He died with a big smile on his face. And Latorno, some of you may remember Mr. Latorno.
Hang on, I want to give you a microphone. Dennis, let me give you a microphone. Huh? Whoop.
He died.
What's your hand?
Hazardous duty.
Paul died with a big smile on his face.
Hold it up.
Yeah.
With a big smile on his face, and I'll never forget that because he just almost glowed. It was pretty awesome to watch. And also another man at the hospital here, I happened to be there at his bedside, and I couldn't understand what he was saying. He was smiling, but the nurse, I asked the nurse, I said, "Can you tell me? You've been around him for the last several days. Can you tell me what he said?" And she says, "Yeah." He says, "I see a light," and he was a great big smile on his face, and then he died. So I've seen the opposite of that. Did see one man who did not have a good experience, and I believe he finally went crazy. I mean, completely out of his mind. But he was a non-Christian, and I've been on many, many death calls over the years as a deputy sheriff for 30 years, and I've often described, the hard death and the easy death. The easy death is the Christian death, and you go with a smile and it's happy and all that. But I've also been at the houses where people living alone, especially living alone, and they've torn at their clothing, rent their garments, trying to get one more breath. If you read their 101 book, it's got some great examples in there at the end of the book. But those who are not Christians, there ain't no hope, and they know it, and that's really, really tough. So it's a hard go.
Whatever the experience is, a vision of heaven and heavenly things, whether it's peaceful or whether it's scary, is for the believer. I mean, a vision of heaven and those things is not to wreck a believer's faith. Okay, it's for the believer, however we describe it. Any kind of visions of hell and the afterlife is judgment on the unbeliever. And what you said, that one guy said, he was able to turn from, what he saw.
I can give you another example of somebody you all know, which was Harvey. Okay. I babysat Harvey with Norma the night before he was called, and he was in a coma, but he made some noise. Norma and I were sitting there talking, and he made some noise, and we got up and walked over to bedside because he was in a hospital bed, hospice there in the house. And we stopped beside and then we didn't say anything, but all of a sudden Harvey opened his eyes. He looked at Norma and he looked at me and he got a very sour expression on his face and he says, "What? I'm still here?" And that night he passed.
That's.
Now there's, in other words, whatever he was seeing was way better than opening his eyes and what he saw, okay?
That's like, let me just finish it. That's like the story of Paul. You know, when Paul got stoned and he died, and he said, you know, he goes, I don't know if I was in the body or out of the body, you know, and then he's talking about all these great things of heaven. And then all the people are praying over his body on earth, you know, all his disciples, they're praying over his body. And Paul comes too. He looks around and he punches them and says, "Why'd you do that? I wanted to be up there."
That example was quoted in the movie.
Oh, was it?
Yeah, that part of scripture was included in there.
Yeah. No, anyway, okay. So we are done. I'm gonna turn off the recording. You guys are all still on. You guys can all, if you want to, sing along and do all the stuff, but I'm.
So don't whisper among yourselves.